On November 10, 1975, the United Nations passed a resolution that declared Zionism a form of racism. Moments later, the U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, rose to speak.
The United States rises to declare before the General Assembly of the United Nations and before the world that it does not acknowledge, it will not abide by, it will never acquiesce in this infamous act.
In his newest book, Moynihan's Moment, Professor Gil Troy brings this unparalleled historic episode to life.
When I started writing the book, I was sure there were 10 other books written about Moynihan's Moment, and to my surprise, I found that there was no book. The United Nations had been established in 1945 as the redemptive moment at the end of World War II. It was supposed to heal the world. By the 1970s, the United Nations is turning into the Third World Dictators Debating Society. It's turning into the lynch mob against Western democracies and against Israel. When Daniel Patrick Moynihan stood up in the well of the General Assembly and said, "This shall not stand," he was standing up for America and for American values. He saw the assault on Zionism as an assault on democracy and decency. After his speech, 100,000 Americans rallied on the streets of New York. And from coast to coast, from left to right, blacks and whites stood up and said Daniel Patrick Moynihan was right. And so Moynihan's moment turned out to be a moment that vindicated Moynihan, that vindicated the fight against Zionism's racism, and vindicated America.
Eventually, the UN repealed the Zionism is racism resolution. But what Moynihan called the big red lie lives on.
In 1991, when the United Nations repealed the Zionism is racism resolution, it was unprecedented. And it should have been the end of the story. But this big red lie, as Moynihan called it, continued. And unfortunately, the Zionism is racism libel continues today. We see it in Israel apartheid days on American campuses. We see it in the halls of the UN. In reading Moynihan's Moment, you'll meet a genuine American hero. You'll discover how Americans stood up and were themselves heroic. And you'll also realize how to fight the claim that Zionism is racism, not just as a Jewish issue, not just as a Zionist issue, but as an American issue and as a human rights issue.